So in this clip, we will be adding an extra piece of fabric around our avatar's neck and sewing that piece to her top. During this process, you'll get to know the end-to-end type of sewing that lets us sew multiple pieces of fabric onto other multiple pieces of fabric. Now in our case, we have one piece of collar that we'll be sewing onto 4 pieces of the top, as shown on this example as well. Now let's access the end-to-end segment sewing by clicking and holding on the segment sewing icon, which opens up a drop-down menu where we can select this tool. Before we start, it's important to know that when sewing, the line of order is very important and that the seam lines are not reversed. Now you'll get an idea of what I mean by that in a few moments. So let's go to our rectangle tool and just create a rectangle, so something like this. And let's position it around her neck using the arrangement points. So let's turn them on and position the rectangle in such a way that the ends meet in the back. So we're going to press this arrangement point in the front. So as you see, the ends meet in the back. Now we can turn off the arrangement points. Now I can see already that I have possibly made the rectangle too short, so I'm going to take my transform pattern tool and just make it a bit longer, so it's going to comfortably go around her neck that way. Alright, so let's say I would like to start sewing with, let's start at the beginning of this line right here, so with this one. So I would like to start with this end, and since it's placed in the back, this part needs to be sewn onto the back pattern. So let's observe the blue dot as we go through this. And if I want to continue sewing on this rectangle, I need to continue with the front pattern. So it's this one, which I labeled with number 2. And then the only way to continue is with the pattern next to it, finishing off with the back pattern, which is this one. So this means we went full circle, and this is the exact order of sewing that needs to be implemented, otherwise the fabric gets messy and starts to overlap each other. So make sure you have the end-to-end segment sewing selected and click on the beginning of this line and press enter. This gives MD the instruction that we are done selecting the M amounts of patterns because we have only one. And let's go in the exact same line order as we had in the beginning. So we started with the back pattern, the 2 front ones, and went full circle with the back pattern as well. Once we're done with that, we need to press enter again. Of course, to give MD the final instruction that we are also done selecting the N amounts of patterns. Now let's check out in our 3D window how the seam lines look, and I'm just going to push this piece of fabric a little more upwards so we'll be able to observe. And in the beginning, I emphasized that the sewing order is very important and also that the lines go straight. So as we see, the sewing order is fine, but some of the seam lines are not going straight. So if we take a careful look, this one is going straight. Maybe on first glance it doesn't seem that way, but if we take a more careful look, we see that it is. But this one is crossed. It's not going right. So what we need to do is take our Edit Sewing tool and identify this seam line, and it's a light blue. So it should be this one. We're going to click on it, right-click, and select Reverse Sewing, which we can also achieve with Ctrl and B. There we go, and now since we reversed the seam line, it is going straight. And since everything else looks fine, we can now simulate by pressing spacebar on our keyboards or this arrow. There we go. Now we can also close off the end and we're just going to click and hold to get the segment sewing back and connect the ends and simulate them. And it's the same story with the top. Now we just need to adjust it a little bit because perhaps it's going a little too high up, and we're going to do that with the help of the Edit Pattern tool. I'm just going to bring this line a bit more down and simulate. Now as you can see, I can manipulate this in any way that I would like, and if I take my Transform Pattern tool, I would like to demonstrate that a little bit. And if I just prolong it much more and simulate, you can see that of course it's falling down because the weight is much greater than it was, but it also starts to ruffle up. So if we would like to generate more wrinkles or ruffles in our garments, we simply make the pieces longer. But since I'm not going for that, I'm just going to go back with Ctrl and Z to get the same effect that we had before. Now, end-to-end sewing can seem complicated at first, but it really is a time saver, so we don't have to manually implement segment sewing for so many patterns. This technique can be useful with sweaters, waistbands, belts, or hoodies. Its other advantage is that once it's implemented, you can edit the seam lines as a group. Even if the total length of the first M segments is shorter or longer than the end segments, the ratio will be automatically calculated, even if we decide to change the length later, which is exactly what happened when I decided to make the rectangle longer. Now before heading on to the next clip, you can play with the shirt as much as you would like. Perhaps you have a different result than I have right here, and that's okay. So I would suggest just playing around with it, making the sweater shorter or longer, trying to achieve more wrinkles and a more realistic effect. And in the next clip, we will be creating shorts.